I'd like to share with you Amazon's top 7 most common and efficient interview questions that I would prepare if I'd go into an Amazon interview. The first one refers to decision making. We don't always make the right judgment all the time. Tell me about the time when you made an error in judgment, and what was the impact and what did you learn? Right, so from the start, this question is super efficient because for someone who did not prepare for a job interview, the tendency is people will get stuck. So failure questions are especially efficient to screen if someone did take the interview seriously. Furthermore, a complex decision making makes it easy for an interviewer to assess a candidate's analytical skills. Most of the time, decision-making boils down to data-driven decision-making and maybe a little bit of gut feeling. Of course, this changes as you advance and if you apply for a senior leadership type of role. But in most cases, people will have to prepare a complex decision with pros and cons, with some data, and these sort of things, and this can easily turn into a deep dive during an intense job interview. Also, when you speak about the decision, that can also reveal quite a lot about the seniority of the role that you're applying for. So, for example, if you're applying for a PM role, your decision shouldn't be that of a director, right? So you would have to match the type of seniority that they're actually looking for in the ideal candidate. Furthermore, which leadership principle would be the most appropriate for this interview question? That would be "I write a lot." Okay, it could also turn into a deep dive, but still the core thing would be "I write a lot." And if you read the leadership principle description, it will start making more sense. What's the best way to give great answers to complex decisions, even at a time when you are wrong, would be to have some great learnings to share about them. And in particular, when you're talking about an error in judgment, the learnings will be your key selling point during a job interview. The second interview question I'd like to talk about here would be, tell me about the time when a product, service, or solution was already receiving good customer feedback, but you decided to do more. Okay? And the key to giving a great answer to this interview question is to spot the leadership principle or the key behavior that's involved, which is insist on the highest standards. In my experience, whenever I ask this question to one of my clients, they have a tendency to answer with a time when they fixed something for the customer. The challenge with this is that such a story of a fix will not score as well when compared to a story of when you wowed your customer with something they didn't even know existed. For instance, so this is why spotting the leadership principle in this scenario is essential. I also have a few assessments that would ask you, hey, which leadership principle is this question asking you about, which I found extremely useful if you want to build your listening skills. The third question I'd like to share with you here would be a time when you had to communicate a change in direction that you anticipated people would have concerns with. How did you handle questions or resistance, and were you able to get people comfortable with that decision? So this would speak about a candidate's interpersonal skills. Interpersonal skills means different things for different levels. For senior level roles, interpersonal skills boils down to influence. For more juniors or mid-level roles, conflict resolution would be the most appropriate way to go around these things. So the way this question is framed, to communicate a change in direction, first you would have to decide what change in direction would be the most appropriate to speak about for your specific role. Right? If you're a software engineer, you wouldn't talk about a change in direction, about a major reorg that the director will have to do. These sort of things. So matching the seniority of the role with the example is also critically important in this context. Now, what leadership principle is this question asking you about? This would be on the leadership principle of earn trust. And once you understand the leadership principle involved, you would understand that it's about building trust, and answering how you communicate a change in direction boils down to building trust. Right? How do you build trust? Well, maybe you communicate with the other side, maybe you bring in the data, various ways you could go around this. But once you understand that you must sell yourself on ability to build trust with others, then it becomes a lot easier for you to answer this interview question. Question number 4, tell me about a complex problem that you solved using a simple solution. So this question might surprise some candidates, and once you hear it for the first time, it might take you a little bit to find the right type of example. But in my experience, once you prepare it in advance, it will be straightforward to answer. Still, which leadership principle do you think this is? This is on invent and simplify. A complex problem with a simple solution. So the key takeaway here is there's some questions in Amazon interviews which, if you prepare in advance and they don't take a lot of time to prepare, then you're going to be in a lot better spot. This is simply because Amazon values a lot candidates who take their interviews seriously. Right? Question number 5. Often we must take decisions as a group. Give me an example of a time when you committed to a group decision even though you disagreed. Would you make the same decision again? Okay, so this is a tricky interview question. Right from the start, I can tell the leadership principle is to have backbone, disagree, and commit. And if you read a little bit between the lines of the interview question, you'll understand it's not about your ability to show backbone, but about your ability to commit to a group's decision. Because what happens in most cases is candidates would answer these interview questions with examples of a time when they committed to a group's decision or their boss's decision, even though they knew that decision was wrong. Okay? In which case, you would not sell yourself on any of your strengths in job interviews. You would basically come across as a yes sir type of candidate, too agreeable, so to speak. Instead, what you should be focusing on would be to talk about a time when a group was right, or your manager, if you want, was right about something. I don't know, maybe they were more experienced, they had some intel which you did not have. You went their way and it turned out to be the right type of decision, right? So even though the leadership principle is have backbone, disagree, it's also have backbone, disagree, and commit. And this is the commit part of that interview question. You may want to seriously prepare for this type of examples to ensure you understand what it actually boils down to, because in my experience, it will take a few attempts until you get this one right. Question number 6, describe a situation of when you make a business decision without consulting your manager. Would you have done the same thing again? And did the decision turn out to be the right one? Right, so a decision without consulting your manager. Why would you do a decision without consulting your manager? Well, not because you don't like your manager, or at least don't say this in a job interview because it won't play to your advantage. But most of the time you'll have to do this without consulting your manager because it's in a speed context. Right, so speed is key sometimes in decision making, and maybe you don't have a lot of time to consult with your manager. So once this is clear that the leadership principle involved would be bias for action, then it also becomes far easier to pitch the right type of story involved in this context. Again, understanding, reading between the lines of the interview questions and spotting the principle is something extremely valuable in these job interviews. And the last question I'd like to share with you here is, sometimes customers make unreasonable requests. Tell me about the time when I had to push back or say no to a customer, and how did it turn out? Okay, so when you have to say no to a customer, many candidates who especially are not customer facing, so to speak, who only have internal customers, would find it challenging to show backbone. Okay, many candidates are actually too agreeable in job interviews, and this is what this question is actually testing about. For example, you'd never want to speak about a situation where you pushed back initially with the customer, but then you realized you were wrong and then the customer was right. No, you have to genuinely sell yourself on your ability to do the right thing for the customer, even though you disagreed with them. So the leadership principle involved is customer obsession, and the main takeaway from this is that you must focus on examples where satisfying a customer's request wasn't as fun as usual. Okay, I know for most roles, your job is not involving a lot of drama or conflict. However, interviewing with high-performing companies, they are especially screening you on these things, or hey, what does this candidate do? Were they working in high pressure, in high standards types of environments? Are they customer obsessed? These sort of things which would basically help you to sell yourself and differentiate yourself from other candidates. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.